Hi there, today's tutorial is for the feature panel of this sympathy card featuring these beautiful wings which almost look as though they're lit up against a very ethereal background. And I've added some embellishment to create this card as well as matte. And I'll show you the card there. It's got the matting behind it as well as 3 panels I've made in blues, purples, very much like the card that I just showed you, and in green grays, which is the color combination I'm going to be using today. So we'll need some spray, a spray bottle with water, which we won't use, but I'll explain. Distress Glaze with its own little applicator. And these are Distress inks in spun sugar, weathered wood, and hickory smoke. Those are the colors we'll use today. That's just some clean paper towel. This is a wet wipe. I apologize for the speed of the video. I must have recorded it at the wrong speed and I've tried to correct here, so bear with me. Nobody can say it's slow though. Those were the embossing plates. That's the embossing folder. It's called Wings by Tim Holtz, and that's watercolor paper. Any watercolor paper will do. They sell Cason at Walmart very inexpensively. It's great. This is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 because it fits well into the folder. And I'm looking for the front of the folder, the inside front, and that's the part that I'm going to color with the pink. I'm going to use the spun sugar for that one. And you could use any color, but really what we're trying to do is to create shadows in those feathers, wings. And the shadows are created by adding color. And I'm going to leave the rest of the wings white, just the same color as the watercolor paper is. So I'm picking up the folder. I've got it open. I've got the inside front piece toward me, and I've taken that small applicator, the mini applicator of the Spun Sugar Distress ink. And what I'm going to do is just wipe it over top of the wings. I'm trying to be a little bit careful that I don't go over the edge, but that's what the wet wipe is for. And as I said, you could use a wet paper towel or damp paper towel as well. But what we're going to do once we've applied this ink, which is again only hitting the high spots and the part that makes a depression in the wings, I'm going to take this towel, wet towel or whatever it is that you want to use to clean off the excess ink. And you can see that pink ink, there's just a little tiny bit of it. And I'm going mostly by feel. And I'm just going around the very edges of those wings and in between the two wings so that I can pull off any excess ink. It's not easy to see the really light inks on these folders, these opaque folders. So my suggestion is that, though you want to do it fairly quickly, the ink's not going to dry rapidly, but you want to do it relatively quickly, but you want to pull off all the excess ink because what you don't pull off will land on the paper. So I'm placing the watercolor paper with a 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch actually on either side on the back panel, which does not have ink on it. And that way if it moves around it doesn't get all messy. And then I put it together. I'm using my Big Shot. I'm using Cuttlebug plates. I just mix it up. It doesn't really bother me, but whatever your machine is and whatever the sandwich combination is to use embossing folders, that's what you'll want to do. And so as you see, I just place mine in very quickly. I'll roll it forward, I'll roll it backward. It's a very, very simple process. And again, when we open it up, what we're going to see is that all of the places that that pink ink hit are going to be the depressed parts of the wings, and they've got pink in them. So it gives it just some really beautiful shadow and dimension, as well as the embossing that's been done with the other parts of the wing folder. So I'm going to, I'm showing here actually what areas I'm trying to hit. I'm going to be using 2 colors of the gray ink. And I'm just showing you here a gel pen and a Posca pen. They're both white, and they can be used to correct any places where the ink hits and they didn't really want it to hit there. So regardless of the color combination you use, you start with the lighter of the 2 would be my recommendation. And I'm taking the applicator brush and putting the little applicator on that was with the weathered wood. And I am really not coming in from the edge of the paper as much as I am trying to bring this weathered wood very lightly up close to the edge of the feathers, all the way around those wings. I don't want to hit the edge of the wings necessarily, though if I do, it's not the end of the world. As I said, if you've got some white pens, you're going to be able to make any corrections that you need to if you happen to hit the edges. But the whole purpose of the lighter color is to really provide the image, the perspective, the view that you've got wings that are almost lit up, and they're lighting up the background so much that it will appear as though they are lighting from the inside out. And to achieve that appearance, you want to have the lightest of the two inks, and again, in this particular combination, it's weathered wood, come up relatively close to the edges of the wings. And so we're going to be I'm sort of showing there just sort of where those edges are. And I'm just going very, very lightly. I'm not really too concerned here about the blending, though I do want to use a fairly light hand. And I do want to leave a bit of a margin, as I said, of white between the wings and where this light weathered wood ink is applied. And so I'm just very lightly, again, going around the entire card. And you're also going to see in a couple of minutes that I wisen up a little bit and pull out a piece of paper towel. And you could use paper or a piece of cloth, anything that's clean, to cover the piece that you're working on where you're holding it down with your other hand. So in this case, I'm left-handed. I'm using my left hand to apply that ink very lightly, and my right hand is holding the piece down. And because my right hand just inadvertently is going to touch ink and could put that ink back down where I don't want it, I'm going to, again, I'll get wise in just a couple seconds here. I'm going to have an aha moment, and I'm going to pick up that piece of paper towel, and I'm going to put it down where I'm holding the piece of watercolor paper down with my other hand. I'm also rolling the very edges of that applicator in the ink, and again, really light-handedly, I'm going into the places that are quite narrow, mostly between the two wings. And I'm sorry if I cover things, but that's what left-handed people do. And as you'll see, I was able to get some of the light ink down between the wings. So now I'm working my way back up along this side and still trying to stay a little bit away from the edge of the wing, but I'm coming in fairly close. But again, at the risk of repeating myself, if you've got a white gel pen and or a white Posca pen or some other kind of pen that works well for you in your stash, then just have that at the ready, because once you're done doing the inking, you can then go back in and correct any of the areas where the wings took a little bit of color and you didn't want that color to be there. And that would apply to the areas that I used in the embossing to begin with as well. Sometimes if you don't wipe off all of the ink from around the edges of the wings, it lands a little bit on the outside of the wings. And so I just go back in with one of those pens and correct it, as I said. So again, you'll see I'm sort of looking at the blending a bit. I don't concern myself a heck of a lot because it can all be corrected with the darker of the two inks. But you just want to use as light a hand as possible. Now, this is the Hickory Smoke, which is the darker of the two. And the technique here is a bit more traditional, where because I'm going to be inking mostly just the edges, the outside edges, I'm not coming in close to the wings with this darker ink. I'm starting from the outside of the paper. I'm starting on my craft mat and I'm going in circular motion and bringing the ink up onto the paper. And while I'm not covering all of the lighter ink that I just put down, I am blending over top of it a little bit so that we have a gradation of the ink color. So what we want to do is go from the very light, beautiful white wings to a sort of a white shine on the outside, to a very light gray, to a darker gray. And then we create all those really beautiful contrasts. So here, I finally got smart about that, took my own advice. I'm using just a piece of paper towel here, which I'll be using later on as well. But it really is handy just to have something around if you're doing this ink blending. I can't tell you how many times I've thought that I'll be just dandy and I pick my finger up and I've left something where it shouldn't be. So it can always be corrected, especially on watercolor paper, which is why I really enjoy, there's other papers you can use for blending, but I really enjoy using watercolor paper when I'm using Distress ink to blend because it does go on almost like butter. It blends really nicely. The paper is just very receptive. And it takes a lot for watercolor paper to pill. It's formulated to be wet. The ink doesn't make it wet, but it makes it a bit damp. So you still want to be, relatively careful, but you're not going to get pilling like you would on a more sort of standard white cardstock. Although you can certainly use a white cardstock for this particular technique, it may not blend the way that you had thought it would. And again, there's ways of sort of mitigating that, correcting it. And actually, while I'm thinking of it, because I forgot to do it for this particular tutorial, once the inking is done, and you'll see again, I'm just going around the very outside edge. I'm actually going down into the V a little bit. I just want to interject myself here. I'm going into the V a little bit with the darker ink, just again so that we get that sort of that variation of color tone in the grays. Anyway, what I was saying earlier was that one of the steps that I did in the original pieces that I did not do for this tutorial is to spritz water on the completed piece. So once all of the inking is done, and before the glaze goes on, which I'll show in just a moment, if you want to have a more ethereal sort of spotted look, almost looks like a sky, stars, that kind of thing, what you can do, because this Distress ink is activated by water or moisture, and it does some very interesting things, what you can do is spray very lightly a mist of water on top of the finished piece, again, before it's protected with the glaze, which I'll show you in a moment. And that will give it a really interesting mottled kind of look. So, and a little bit more ethereal, even sort of more heavenly, if you will. But again, it's up to you. If you really like the blending and you're happy with the way it looks, then don't splash any water on it or spritz any water on it. On the other hand, if the blending looks like it's a little bit dark and light where you didn't really want it to be, spraying a little bit of water, or spritzing a bit of water and letting it dry fully is going to give you even more sort of discoloration, and it makes it look very intentional. So it's very forgiving, the whole process. And I don't strive for perfection in my projects. I strive for something that's very pleasing, first of all, to the person that's going to be receiving it, whether it's a card or other project, and of course, pleasing to me. But if you are the type of person that really wants something to look very perfect, then you can work at this for some time so that you can get the blending to look exactly the way you want it to. But the purpose here, again, with these two colors is to get darker on the outside edges and a bit lighter where the wings are. So back we are in a bit faster motion. I have a special pad just for the glaze, and I need that clean paper towel at one side. And once the project is completely dry, and you've done any little touch-ups like I've done here, I'm just doing some white gel pen to bring back the whiteness of the wings where I may have touched them a little bit with the foam brushes as I'm blending. And just before you do that touch-up is where you may want to do the spritz of water if that's what you plan to do. But this is where you apply the glaze. So a tiny, less is more, a little bit of glaze on the end of this application brush, which is just for the glaze. And I'm going to apply it across the entire piece in that circular motion that we use for blending. It's such a tiny amount. And then we go back with a clean paper towel and I'm going to buff it off very lightly, not too much. And what it's going to do is send that glaze into a coating position over top of the inks that I've used and into the grain of the paper. So here again are the three pieces that I had shown you at the very beginning, just to give you an idea of that beautiful ethereal look. And you can see that there are many color combinations. There are others, of course, as well, but many color combinations that would work with this particular set of wings. Depending on what piece it is that you're working on, you may have your own idea about what color combinations you would like to use. So I'll leave you with this, and you can enjoy the card again. Thanks for joining me today.